Before we begin, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your comfort? Have you ever walked into a room and felt your soul shrink just to fit inside? My name is Michael Turner, and I want you to drop your own story in the comment section below. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The first warning I ignored. I didn't face that lion's den alone. Or at least, I didn't intend to. Lena was right beside me in the elevator, her hand squeezing mine so hard my knuckles turned white. "She just wants to know you," Lena whispered, fixing my tie for the third time. "Don't be intimidated. She's just protective." Protective. That was the word Lena used. Predatory was the word I should have heard. We stepped into Margaret Whitmore's penthouse, and the air instantly changed. It was colder here. Silence hung heavy over the white marble floors and glass walls. Margaret was standing by the window, her back to us. She didn't turn around when we entered. "Mom," Lena said, her voice sounding younger, smaller than usual. "We're here. This is Michael." Margaret turned slowly. She didn't look at Lena. Her eyes locked onto me immediately, cold and assessing. "I see him," she said. Her voice was smooth, like polished stone. Then, she flicked her hand at her daughter. "Lena, go check on the tea service in the kitchen. The staff is incompetent today." "But Mom," I wanted to. "Now, Lena," Margaret said. She didn't raise her voice, but the command whipped through the room like a lash. Lena froze. She looked at me, her eyes apologetic, full of a helplessness I didn't understand yet. "I'll be right back," she whispered to me. She walked away, leaving me alone in the center of the room. That was the first red flag. Margaret didn't just want to meet me. She wanted to isolate me. She separated the herd before the hunt even began. Once Lena was gone, Margaret finally walked toward me. "So," she said, stopping just inside my personal space. "You're the one." "I'm Michael Turner," I said, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure." She ignored my hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Turner. I want to know what you are." She walked around me, circling me like I was a used car she was thinking of buying but suspected had a leak. "Where are you from?" "I grew up in the East End," I said, keeping my chin up. "My father was a mechanic. My mother taught school." "Laborers," she said. "Not a question. A label." "Hard workers," I corrected. She smiled then. "A small, tight thing." "Oh, that explains your confidence." I laughed nervously. I thought she meant I had grit. I didn't realize that in her world, confidence without a trust fund is seen as arrogance. "Lena tells me you have ambition," she said, pouring herself a drink without offering me one. "She says you want to build things." "I'm an engineer," I said. "I plan to start my own firm." "Plans," she sighed. "Everyone has plans, Michael. My daughter needs security. She needs a world that doesn't fluctuate with the market or your plans." "I love her," I said. "I'll take care of her." "Love," Margaret said, letting out a short, dry laugh. "Love is a chemical reaction. It fades. Lifestyle is permanent. Do you really think you fit in this world? Look around you." I looked. The luxury, the view, the coldness. "You are a tourist here," she whispered. "Enjoy the view while you can, because Lena will eventually wake up and remember who she is. And you will just be a memory." Just then, Lena returned with the tea tray, smiling as if the tension wasn't thick enough to choke on. "Did you two get acquainted?" she asked brightly. Margaret smiled at her daughter, a warm, fake smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh yes, darling. Michael and I understand each other perfectly." She looked at me one last time, her eyes dead. "Don't we, Michael?" I nodded, mute. I didn't understand that some smiles are verdicts. I didn't know that she had already sentenced me. The trial hadn't even begun, and I had already lost. That was the first warning, and like a fool, I ignored it. To understand the tragedy of what happened later, you have to understand who Lena was when I found her. She was nothing like Margaret. In fact, she seemed to be constructing her entire personality as a direct rebellion against her mother's world. We didn't meet at a gala or a charity auction. We met in a muddy trench on the outskirts of the city. I was volunteering for a community engineering project, fixing drainage systems for a neighborhood that the city had forgotten. It was grueling, dirty work. I was waist-deep in mud, trying to leverage a pipe into place, when a pair of hands grabbed the other end. I looked up and saw her. She was wearing oversized coveralls that were covered in clay. Her hair was a mess, and there was a smudge of dirt right across her forehead. "On three," she yelled over the sound of the rain. 1, 2, 3. We shoved the pipe into place, and as it clicked, She let out a cheer that wasn't polite or restrained. It was loud. It was real. That was Lena. She loved street food more than fine dining. After our shifts, while the other volunteers went home to shower, we would sit on the tailgate of my truck, eating tacos from a food stand that had a B- health rating. She ate with her hands. She laughed with her mouth open. She hated titles. She refused to tell anyone her last name for the first 3 weeks we worked together. She listened when people spoke. I mean, she really listened. Margaret listened to find weaknesses. Lena listened to find connection. One night, about a month after we met, it was pouring rain. We were huddled under the awning of a closed shop, sharing a cheap coffee. "Why do you do this?" I asked her. "You don't have to be here." I didn't know about the penthouse then, but I knew she didn't need the money. Her boots were expensive, even under the mud. She looked out at the rain, her expression shifting from joy to something heavier. "Because out here," she said softly, "nobody cares who my grandfather was. Nobody cares about the legacy. I'm just hands. I'm just help." She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "I feel free around you, Michael. You don't look at me like I'm an investment." I took her hand then. It was rough from the work, cold from the rain. "I see you, Lena," I said. "Just you." She squeezed my hand back, and for a moment, I thought we were the only two people in the world. She said she felt free around me. She said I was her escape. That should have told me everything about the world she came from. I thought I was her partner. I didn't realize I was just her vacation. And vacations eventually end. Chapter 3. How Margaret Measured Men. Margaret Whitmore didn't dislike me emotionally. That would have implied she respected me enough to have feelings about me. No, she disliked me strategically. To her, people weren't souls, they were chess pieces. And if a piece didn't have a clear function, it was just clutter. I spent enough time in that penthouse to learn her taxonomy. To Margaret, men fell into 3 distinct categories. First, there were the assets. These were the men she could use. Politicians who needed funding, business partners who needed introductions, artists who needed patronage. She collected them like she collected the art on her walls. She polished them, displayed them, and when their value dropped, she sold them. Second, there were the peers. Men who had as much money as she did. She didn't like them, but she tolerated them because they were the only ones who spoke her language. They were the only ones she couldn't crush, so she formed non-aggression pacts with them. They nodded at each other at galas, sharks acknowledging other sharks in the water. And third, there were the protectors. Lawyers, security consultants, fixers. Men she paid to keep the real world away from her glass tower. Then, there was me. I worked hard. I paid my taxes. I opened doors for people. But I didn't control wealth, which meant I wasn't a peer. I didn't want her money, which meant I wasn't an asset she could buy. And I wasn't on her payroll, so I wasn't a protector. I was an anomaly. I remember a dinner party about 3 months into my engagement with Lena. Margaret was holding court at the head of the table. She was dissecting a young architect who had just married her niece. "Ambition is lovely, David," she said, swirling her wine. "But infrastructure is better. Who is backing your new firm?" David stammered a name. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Oh, him. Well, I suppose everyone starts somewhere." In 2 sentences, she had reduced him to a footnote. She had measured him and found him wanting. Later that night, she cornered me on the balcony. "You don't want anything, do you?" she asked. It sounded like an accusation. "I have what I want," I said. "I have Lena. I have my work." She looked at me with genuine confusion. "That's it. No grand designs? No desire for elevation?" "I'm happy," I said. That word, happy, seemed to offend her. To Margaret, happiness was for children and pets. Adults sought power. Adults sought leverage. The fact that I was content with my mediocre life made me unpredictable. A man who wants money can be bribed. A man who wants status can be flattered. A man who wants nothing, he's bulletproof. And that made me dangerous, which meant I couldn't be controlled by her wealth either. I didn't realize it then, but that conversation on the balcony was the moment she moved me from clutter to threat. She stopped measuring my value and started measuring the cost of my removal. Chapter 4. The engagement that changed everything. I proposed on a Tuesday. It wasn't in Paris. It wasn't on a yacht. It was in Lena's living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes because she was moving into a new place. I didn't have a photographer hiding in the bushes. It was just us. I knelt down on the hardwood floor, amidst the bubble wrap and tape, and asked her to build a life with me. Lena cried. She dropped the vase she was holding. It didn't break. Thank God. It just bounced on a pile of towels, and she fell to her knees with me. She said yes before I even finished the question. For 12 hours, we were invincible. We were just a man and a woman in love. Then, we had to tell Margaret. We went to the penthouse for Sunday brunch. The table was set with silver and crystal, a sharp contrast to the takeout boxes we'd been living out of. "Mom," Lena said, her voice trembling with excitement. "We have news." She put her hand on the table, the modest diamond ring catching the light. Margaret stopped buttering her toast. She didn't gasp. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for her daughter's hand. She put down her knife with a soft clink. "Let me see it," she said. Lena stretched out her hand. Margaret didn't touch her. She just leaned in, inspecting the stone like a jeweler looking for inclusions. She looked at the setting, the cut, the clarity. "It's quaint," she said finally, leaning back. The air left the room. Lena pulled her hand back as if she'd been burned. "Michael picked it out himself," she said defensively. "I'm sure he did," Margaret said. She turned her pale eyes to me. "Do you have a business card, Michael?" The question threw me. "My card. Now." "Yes, now." I reached into my wallet and pulled out one of my cards. I was a senior engineer at a reputable firm. It wasn't a CEO's card, but it was respectable. Margaret took it by the corner, as if it were dirty tissue. She glanced at it, then placed it on the tablecloth next to her plate. "And who is your lawyer?" she asked. I laughed nervously. "I don't have a lawyer, Margaret. I'm marrying your daughter, not suing her." Margaret didn't laugh. She picked up her mimosa, the crystal flute looking fragile in her manicured hand. "Marriage is a contract, Michael," she said softly. "It is the merger of assets. In Lena's case, substantial assets. In your case." She glanced at my business card again. "Potential." She took a sip, her eyes never leaving mine. "To enter such a contract without legal counsel," she continued, "is either arrogant or foolish." "It's love," Lena interjected, her voice rising. "It's not a merger, Mom. It's love." Margaret looked at her daughter with a pitying expression. Then she looked back at me. "Love is brave," she said. The way she said it, it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a diagnosis. It sounded like she was saying, "You are walking into a fire you do not understand." "Love is brave," she repeated. "We will have the papers drawn up by the end of the week." That was it. No congratulations. No hug. Just a demand for a lawyer and a backhanded compliment that felt like a threat. That was the moment the quiet war began. She didn't declare it. She didn't scream. She just opened a file on me. Chapter 5. The wedding that was never ours. If the engagement was a skirmish, the wedding was a full-scale occupation. Margaret insisted on paying for everything. "It is tradition," she said, waving a hand as if she were swatting away a fly. "And besides, I have standards to maintain." Lena wanted a garden wedding. She wanted wildflowers and a jazz band. She wanted tacos, though she knew that was a losing battle. Margaret booked the Cathedral of St. Jude and the grand ballroom at the plaza. "The garden is lovely for a picnic, darling," Margaret told Lena. "But this is a wedding. It is a statement." She was right. It was a statement. But the statement wasn't about our love. It was about her power. She chose the florist. She chose the menu. She chose the wine. Every time Lena tried to interject, Margaret would smile that polished stone smile and say, "Trust me, darling. I know what looks best." The guest list was the first casualty. We had planned for 100 people. Intimate, close friends and family. By the time Margaret was done, the list was 500. 450 of them were her friends, her business partners, her peers. My parents, my hardworking mechanic father and teacher mother, flew in from the East End. They bought new clothes for the occasion. My father looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. My mother looked terrified. At the ceremony, they were seated in the back row, behind a pillar. I watched them craning their necks to see their son get married, while the front rows were filled with senators and CEOs who didn't know my middle name. I tried to move them. I told the wedding planner to fix it. She looked at her clipboard, terrified. "Mrs. Whitmore set the seating chart," she whispered. "I can't change it." The reception was a coronation. Not for us. For Margaret. She held court at the center of the room. People lined up to congratulate her. Lena and I stood by the cake like props. At one point, during the planning, I had suggested something simpler. I had said, "Margaret, this is too much. We're simple people." She had stopped what she was doing, turned to the room full of florists and caterers, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't limit my daughter's life with your modesty, Michael." People laughed. They thought it was witty. I stood there, burning. I learned that day how money can humiliate without raising its voice. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to point out the difference between what you can afford and what you are being given. As we danced our first dance, Lena whispered in my ear, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's okay, I lied." But it wasn't okay. I looked over Lena's shoulder and saw Margaret watching us. She wasn't smiling. She looked satisfied, like a general surveying a conquered city. She had bought the wedding, and in her mind, she had bought the marriage, too. Chapter 6. How her money moved into our marriage. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's amazing to see how far this story reaches. The invasion didn't happen with troops. It happened with delivery trucks. It started small. While we were on our honeymoon, a modest trip to the coast that I had paid for, Margaret had our apartment refreshed. We came home to find a new sofa in the living room. It was Italian leather, cream-colored, and utterly impractical. It replaced the comfortable, slightly worn fabric couch I had bought with my first bonus check. "Oh wow," Lena exclaimed, running her hand over the leather. "Mom must have done this. It's beautiful." It was beautiful. It was also a symbol. It was a piece of furniture that cost more than my car, sitting in the middle of my home, declaring that my taste and my budget were insufficient. Then came the car itself. My Honda was 6 years old. It was reliable. I took care of it. Margaret called it a death trap. 2 weeks after the wedding, a brand new German sedan appeared in our driveway. A driver handed me the keys. "Mrs. Whitmore thought you might need an upgrade," the man said. I drove straight to the penthouse. "Take it back," I told Margaret. I tossed the keys onto her marble coffee table. She didn't look up from her book. "Don't be dramatic, Michael. Your car has no side impact airbags. Do you want my daughter riding in something unsafe?" That was her trump card. It was always Lena. If I refused the gift, I was endangering Lena. If I refused the money, I was depriving Lena. "We can buy our own car when we can afford it," I said, my voice tight. Margaret closed her book. "Why wait? Why should you struggle? Struggling is not a virtue, Michael. It is simply inefficient. It's about independence," I argued. "Independence," she scoffed. "You sound like a teenager running away from home. This is how adults live. They accept help. They leverage resources." She pushed the keys back toward me. "Keep it. Sell your Honda. Put the money into your firm. Consider it an investment in your efficiency." I kept the car. I told myself it was for Lena's safety, but every time I started the engine, I felt like I was driving a hearse for my own pride. Then came the vacations. "You both look tired," Margaret would say, and tickets to St. Bart's would appear. Then the help. A housekeeper started coming twice a week. "You work too hard to clean toilets," Margaret said. Each gift erased a boundary. Each check she wrote bought her a share of our lives. "You shouldn't struggle. This is how adults live. You'll understand eventually." What she meant was, "You'll adjust." And the most terrifying part? Lena started to adjust. One night, I complained about the housekeeper moving my papers. "We don't need her," I said. "We can clean our own house." Lena sighed, sinking into the Italian leather sofa. "Maybe she's right, Michael. Why should we scrub floors if we don't have to? Mom just wants to make things easier." Easier. That was the trap. Margaret was making our lives so easy that we were forgetting how to stand on our own feet. She was crippling us with comfort, and I was the only one who noticed the atrophy setting in. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe, like, and turn on post notifications. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. It helps more than you know. Chapter 7. What she said about me when I wasn't there. Before I tell you what I heard, I want to ask, what is the worst thing anyone has ever said about you? Was it an insult to your face? Or was it something whispered behind your back? Let me know in the comments. I overheard it by accident. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment where I was hiding behind a curtain. It was mundane. We were at the penthouse for a cocktail hour before a charity gala. I had left my phone in the library. I walked back down the hallway. The thick Persian rug swallowed the sound of my footsteps. The library door was ajar, just an inch. I heard Margaret's voice. She wasn't shouting. She sounded bored. She was on the phone, likely with one of her peers. "Oh, Michael," she said. "He's sweet. He's very earnest." She made earnest sound like simple. I stopped. I knew I should keep walking. I knew nothing good comes from listening to conversations not meant for you. But I froze. No, I'm not worried, darling, Margaret continued. Why would I be? There was a pause while the other person spoke. Then Margaret laughed, a soft, dismissive sound. He's kind, she said, but he is temporary. Temporary. The word hung in the air like smoke. Lena is just experimenting, Margaret said, pouring herself a drink. I heard the clink of the bottle. She's experimenting with a different life, like a gap year. She'll get bored. She'll outgrow him. Outgrow, as if I were a pair of shoes that were too tight. As if I were a teenage phase, like dyeing your hair or listening to punk rock. She will wake up one morning and realize that Ernest doesn't pay for the Hamptons, Margaret said. And when she does, I'll be here to pick up the pieces. Until then, we wait. I backed away. I walked softly back down the hall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't barge in. I didn't confront her. What was there to confront? She hadn't insulted my character. She hadn't attacked my family. She had done something far worse. She had dismissed my existence. She didn't hate me. She didn't even respect me enough to consider me a threat. To her, I was just a placeholder. I was a seat filler until the real husband arrived. Temporary. That word stayed with me longer than any scream. It dug into my insecurity. It whispered to me late at night. What if she's right? What if Lena does outgrow you? Margaret wasn't fighting me. She was just waiting for me to expire. And the worst part was, I started to wait for it too. If you've ever felt like an imposter in your own life, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see how this ends. Because Margaret was wrong about one thing, I wasn't temporary. I was just getting started. Chapter 8. How Lena began to change. It didn't happen overnight. If it had, I might have fought it harder. I might have packed my bags sooner. But it was slow. It was like coastal erosion. You don't notice the cliff is disappearing until your house is hanging over the edge. At first, it was just advice. Lena would come home from lunch with Margaret and say, Mom thinks we should look into a different bank. Or, Mom says that neighborhood is up and coming. It seemed harmless. Margaret was a successful businesswoman. Why not listen to her advice? But then, advice turned into permission. We were looking to buy our first house. I had found a fixer-upper in a decent neighborhood. It had good bones. I could see the potential. I sketched out plans for a new kitchen, a deck, a garden. I showed Lena the listing. I expected her eyes to light up the way they used to when we talked about building things together. Instead, she frowned. She pulled out her phone. Let me send this to Mom, she said. Why? I asked. It's our house, Lena, not hers. She knows real estate, Michael. I just want her opinion. Her opinion came back 10 minutes later via text. Asterisk too small. Bad investment. Pass. Asterisk. Lena put the phone down. Mom's right. It's a bad investment. She hasn't even seen it. I argued. We haven't even walked through the door. She knows these things, Lena said, her voice shutting down. Let's keep looking. We kept looking. Or rather, I kept looking, and Margaret kept vetoing. Then, the language started to change. Lena started using phrases that weren't hers. She started using words like leverage and optics and social capital. One night, I suggested we go camping for our anniversary. Lena used to love camping. Our first trip together had been to a national park, sleeping in a tent that smelled like mildew. She looked at me with a look I can only describe as distaste. Camping, she said. It's so dirty, Michael. Why would we sleep on the ground when Mom offered us the villa in Tuscany? Because I want to be with you, I said. Just us. No staff. No marble floors. You're being difficult, she sighed. You're always so difficult about her generosity. I'm not being difficult, I said. I'm trying to protect our marriage. From what? She snapped. From comfort? From success? From her, I said. Lena shook her head. Maybe you're being sensitive. You're obsessed with her, Michael. You see enemies where there are only allies. Sensitive. Obsessed. Those were Margaret's words. I had heard Margaret use them to dismiss rivals at dinner parties. Now, they were coming out of my wife's mouth. That was the moment I realized the truth. Our marriage wasn't a partnership anymore. It had acquired a third vote. And since Lena always checked with Margaret before she cast her ballot, I was always going to be outvoted. I was a minority shareholder in my own life. And the hostile takeover was almost complete. Chapter 9. The dinner that took my dignity. Before we get to that night, I have to ask you, have you ever been the butt of a joke in a room full of people? Did you laugh along to save face? Or did you feel something inside you break? Tell me your story in the comments. I used to think my dignity was a mountain. Something solid, unshakable, built on a lifetime of hard work and honest living. But I learned that night that dignity is more like a house of cards. One well-placed breath from the right person, and it all comes tumbling down. We were at a black tie fundraiser for some museum. The ballroom was a sea of velvet and silk, illuminated by chandeliers that cost more than my parents' house. The air was thick with the scent of vintage champagne and the kind of arrogance that only comes from generations of wealth. I was sitting at Margaret's table, surrounded by her inner circle. The man to my left was a venture capitalist who had just sold his third tech company for $1 billion. He asked me what I did. "I'm a senior engineer," I said. He blinked, as if I had spoken in a language he hadn't heard in years. "Oh," he said, turning back to his lobster. "How essential." I felt the familiar heat rising in my neck. I looked at Lena. She was deep in conversation with a woman about an upcoming horse show. She didn't see me. Then, Margaret stood up to give the toast. She looked magnificent. She wore a deep emerald gown that made her look like royalty. The room went silent the moment she tapped her crystal glass. "To ambition," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. "And to marrying wisely." The room erupted in applause. There were whistles and cheers. People toasted their spouses. Then Margaret turned her pale, ice-cold eyes directly to me. "Because some lessons," she said, the smile on her face never reaching her eyes, "take much longer to learn than others. Isn't that right, Michael?" The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't a mean-spirited laugh, at least, not to them. It was a polite, wealthy laughter. The kind of laughter that treats your life like a charming little experiment that hasn't quite succeeded yet. I felt every eye in the room on me. I felt the weight of their judgment, their pity, their amusement. I looked at Lena. I waited for her to stand up. I waited for her to say, "That's enough, Mom." I waited for her to take my side. She didn't. She reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Hard. But she didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at the guests. She just looked at her plate, her face a mask of polite endurance. She was telling me to stay quiet. She was telling me to take it. She was telling me that my dignity was less important than her mother's optics. In that moment, something inside me folded. It didn't break with a bang. It just quietly collapsed. I didn't get up and leave. I didn't throw my drink. I didn't shout. I just sat there. I smiled a tight, fake smile. I even managed a small nod. But I wasn't there anymore. I realized then that I was a ghost in this room. I was a prop in Margaret's play. And even my wife was just an audience member, too afraid to stop the performance. That was the night I stopped fighting for a seat at their table. Because I realized I didn't want to eat their food anyway. If you're still with me, please subscribe and share. We're entering the final act now. And trust me, the ending isn't what Margaret expected. Chapter 10. How I was removed without a fight. Most marriages end with a bang. A fight, an affair, a slammed door. Mine ended with a reorganization. Margaret didn't yell. She didn't throw things. She simply called in the consultants. It started with estate planning. That was the Trojan horse. I would come home from work to find Lena sitting at the dining table with 3 men in gray suits. They had binders thick with spreadsheets. They had the air of undertakers measuring a body for a coffin. When I walked in, the conversation would stop. "Hey," I'd say, loosening my tie. "What's this?" Lena wouldn't look at me. She would look at the man at the head of the table, Margaret's lawyer. "It's just tax stuff, Michael," she'd say, her voice tight. "Mom's team is helping us restructure for efficiency." Efficiency. There was that word again. "Do you need me to sign anything?" I asked once. The lawyer smiled a thin, paper-cut smile. "No, Mr. Turner. That won't be necessary. These assets are premarital." I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and I heard them start talking again. Low, urgent. Over the next few months, I started to disappear from my own life. My name was removed from the joint checking account. "Ideally, we should keep expenses separate," Lena said. "It's cleaner." Our vacation fund, money I had saved from my own paychecks, was moved into a trust one couldn't access. "It's for better interest rates," she promised. Then came the decisions. "We're selling the car," Lena told me one Tuesday. Not, "Should we sell the car?" but "We are selling it." "I signed the papers for the new condo," she said a week later. "I didn't even see the new condo," I protested. "Mom saw it," Lena said. She says it's perfect. I looked at my wife. She looked tired. She looked thin. She looked like someone who was being hollowed out from the inside, but she was too afraid to ask for it to stop. Lena, I said, grabbing her shoulders. I am your husband. Why am I not in these meetings? Why am I not making these decisions with you? She pulled away. It's practical, Michael. Why do you have to make everything an emotional issue? It's just business. Mom's team handles it better than you can. Practical. Practical felt like disappearing. I realized then what was happening. They weren't just restructuring our finances. They were restructuring the family tree. They were pruning me out. I wasn't a partner anymore. I wasn't even a tenant. I was a liability that was being written off the books. And the worst part wasn't the lawyers. It was watching Lena sign the papers that erased me, one signature at a time. Chapter 11. The night I left. It wasn't a fight. There was no screaming. There were no thrown vases. It was a Tuesday. It was raining. I came home from work and found a new rug in the hallway. Another gift. Another replacement. Another square foot of my life that had been paved over by Margaret's checkbook. I stood there, looking at the rug, and I realized, I don't live here. I am a guest in my own marriage. I walked past the rug. I went into the bedroom. I went to the back of the closet, past the rows of suits Margaret had bought me, and pulled out my old canvas duffel bag, the one I had used in college. It smelled like dust and old memories. It smelled like me. I started packing. I packed only what belonged to Michael Turner. My old jeans, my t-shirts, my books, my drafting tools. I left the Italian suits. I left the Swiss watch. I left the cashmere sweaters. I stripped my life down to the essentials. Lena walked in just as I was zipping the bag. She stopped in the doorway. She didn't ask what I was doing. She didn't ask where I was going. She knew. Michael, she whispered. She sat on the edge of the bed her mother had picked out, and started to cry. It wasn't a loud sob. It was a quiet, defeated weeping. We can fix this, she said. We can go to counseling. Mom knows a great therapist. I laughed. A short, dry sound. Mom knows a therapist. Of course she does. I picked up the bag. It was heavy, but it felt lighter than the air in that room. I love you, Lena, I said, and I meant it. But I can't compete with your mother for my own place in my marriage. She's just trying to help, Lena pleaded. No, I said. She's trying to win. And she won. I walked out of the bedroom. I walked down the hall. Margaret was there. She was standing in the living room, holding a glass of wine. She must have let herself in with her key. Or maybe she just materialized there, like she always did. She didn't say a word. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't feign surprise. She just watched. Her face was calm. Her eyes were clear. She looked like a chess player watching her opponent tip over his king. Satisfied. I walked past her. I didn't look at her. I didn't acknowledge her victory. I opened the front door and stepped out into the rain. I didn't have a car. The German sedan was in her name. So I walked. I walked 5 miles in the pouring rain to a motel on the edge of town. I was wet. I was cold. I was broke. But for the first time in 3 years, the air I was breathing belonged to me. Chapter 12. The lowest point that saved me. I moved into a studio apartment on the edge of the industrial district. It was above a bakery that started baking bread at 4 a.m. It smelled like yeast and diesel exhaust. The view from my single window was a brick wall. A literal brick wall, 3 feet away. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a folding table I bought at a thrift store, and 1 chair. Margaret would have called it squalor. Lena would have called it tragic. I called it sanctuary. For the first time in 3 years, I woke up and didn't have to check the temperature of the room. I didn't have to scan Lena's face to see if I was in trouble. I didn't have to wonder if my time matched the upholstery. The silence in that apartment was different from the silence in the penthouse. The silence in the penthouse was expensive. It was the silence of a museum, where you're afraid to touch anything. It was a silence that judged you. The silence in my studio was mine. It was empty, yes, but it was an emptiness waiting to be filled, not an emptiness that was trying to erase me. I rebuilt my life 1 habit at a time. I made my own coffee. It was cheap instant coffee, and it tasted better than the artisanal blends Margaret's staff brewed because I made it myself. I ate cereal for dinner, not because I couldn't afford steak, but because I didn't have to impress anyone. I started drawing again, not blueprints for clients, but sketches, ideas, things I wanted to build. I realized that luxury is heavy. It requires maintenance. It requires staff. It requires vigilance. You have to protect it. You have to insure it. You have to worry about it. Simplicity is light. I had nothing to lose, so I had nothing to fear. I remember one night, sitting on my mattress, eating a sandwich, listening to the rain hit the window. I looked around at my peeling wallpaper and my mismatched socks, and I felt a wave of peace so profound it almost knocked me over. I was broke. I was divorced, or soon to be. I was living in a shoebox. But I was free. I had hit rock bottom, according to Margaret's metrics. But rock bottom became the solid foundation I built the rest of my life on. It was the lowest point of my financial life, but it was the highest point of my soul. Chapter 13. The life I built without permission. I started Turner Architecture on a rainy Tuesday morning. It was the same day I signed my divorce papers. There was no ribbon cutting. There was no press release. There was just me, sitting at my folding table in my studio apartment, opening a fresh notebook. My office was the corner of the room where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest. My staff was a coffee maker I had bought at a garage sale. My first client wasn't a senator or a CEO. It was Mrs. Abadi, the woman who owned a bakery downstairs. She wanted to expand her kitchen. "I can't pay much," she told me, wiping flour from her hands. "But I can pay in cash. And bread." I took the job. Margaret would have laughed. A kitchen remodel? For a bakery? It was beneath me. It was beneath the man she had tried to mold. But I threw myself into that design like I was building a cathedral. I measured every inch. I optimized every workflow. I made sure Mrs. Abadi would have the best kitchen in the city. When it was finished, she cried. She hugged me. She gave me a loaf of sourdough that was still warm. That loaf of bread felt more valuable than the Italian leather sofa Lino loved so much. Because I had earned it. I had traded my skill for it, not my dignity. Word started to spread. Slowly. "He's good," people said. "He listens. He doesn't upsell you." I started getting calls. Small jobs at first. A deck, a garage, a small office renovation. I worked 18-hour days. I drew until my hand cramped. I ate dinner standing up over blueprints. I pitched to developers who looked at my office address and raised an eyebrow. I lost jobs because I didn't have the right connections. I lost jobs because I refused to play the game Margaret's way. But I kept building. 3 years after I walked out of the penthouse, I submitted a blind bid for a community center in the East End, my old neighborhood. It was a big contract. The kind of contract that makes a career. I went to the presentation meeting in my one good suit. A suit I had bought myself off the rack. I presented my vision. I talked about light. I talked about flow. I talked about community. I didn't drop names. I didn't mention who my ex-mother-in-law was. 2 weeks later, I got the call. "Mr. Turner," the city planner said, "the committee loved your design. You got the job." I sat there in my studio, holding the phone, and I didn't cheer. I just closed my eyes and breathed. I had won. I hadn't won because of who I knew. I hadn't won because of who I married. I hadn't won because someone pulled a string for me. I won because I was good. When I signed that contract, my hand didn't shake. I owned that ink. I owned that success. It was a fraction of the wealth Margaret controlled, but every single penny belonged to me. No one could take it away. No one could leverage it against me. I had built a life without permission, and it was solid as rock. Chapter 14. The empire that finally cracked. Margaret's world didn't collapse dramatically. It didn't end with an explosion. It leaked. It started on a Tuesday, ironically enough. A small article in the financial section of the newspaper. Whitmore Holdings under audit. Margaret dismissed it. She told her friends it was a clerical error. She told her enemies it was a witch hunt. But the leak became a drip, and the drip became a flood. It turned out that Margaret hadn't just been efficient with her money. She had been creative. Too creative. She had been leveraging assets she didn't fully own. She had been moving money between trusts like shells in a street game, hiding debt and inflating value. She treated the law the way she treated people, as a suggestion, not a rule. But gravity always wins. When the market dipped, just a few points, her house of cards couldn't hold the weight. I watched it unfold from my office. I watched the headlines change from audit to investigation to indictment. Her peers, the sharks she swam with, didn't come to her rescue. Sharks don't help bleeding sharks. They eat them. They circled. They bought her distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. Her protectors, her lawyers and fixers, were the first to turn. The lawyer who had sat at my dining table, the one who had smiled that paper-cut smile, cut a deal with the SEC to save his own license. He handed over the binders. He handed over the emails. He handed over Margaret. Money runs fast when fear replaces confidence. Power runs faster. The final blow came 6 months later. I saw it on the news in the break room of the community center I was building. The penthouse. The fortress of solitude. The place where I had been measured and found wanting. It was being raided. I saw agents and windbreakers carrying out boxes. I saw the doorman, the one who used to look down on my Honda, holding the door open for them. And then I saw Margaret. She was walking out of the building, flanked by 2 lawyers. She wasn't in handcuffs, but she looked like a prisoner. She wasn't wearing her emerald gown. She was wearing a beige coat that looked 2 sizes too big. She looked smaller. She looked mortal. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a strange, hollow sadness. Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had spent her life measuring the worth of everyone around her, was finally being measured by the law, and she was found wanting. Chapter 15. When Lena finally saw the cage. It was 4 years later. I was in my office, my real office, with a receptionist and a view of the river when she walked in. She didn't have an appointment. She didn't need one. "Hello, Michael," she said. She looked different. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes Margaret used to curate for her. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, messy real. She didn't arrive in a limousine. I looked out the window and saw a beat-up Honda Civic parked at the curb. "Coffee?" I asked. We walked to a bench in the park across the street. It was autumn. The leaves were turning. We sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't the awkward silence of our marriage. It was a heavy, mournful silence. "She lost everything," Lena said finally. She didn't have to say who she was. "I know," I said. "I saw the news." "The penthouse is sold," Lena continued. "The art, the jewelry, it's all gone. She's living in a guest house in Connecticut. A friend took pity on her." "And you?" I asked. Lena looked at her hands. "I'm working," she said. "I'm a teacher's aide. It pays the rent." She laughed, a sound that was half sob. "I live in a walk-up, Michael. 4th floor. No doorman. No view. Do you hate it?" I asked. She looked at me, and her eyes were clear for the first time in years. "No," she said. "I love it. It's mine." Tears started to spill down her cheeks. "I see it now," she whispered. "I see the cage." "She never wanted me happy," Lena said, her voice shaking. "She wanted me controlled. She wanted me to be a doll in her dollhouse. And you were the only one who tried to break the glass." She reached out and took my hand. Her hand felt smaller than I remembered. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry I didn't fight for us. I'm so sorry I let her win." "She didn't win, Lena," I said gently. "Look at you. You're free. We could try again," she said. It was a question, but barely. It was a wish thrown into a well. I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had promised to love forever. Part of me, the part that remembered the mud and the tacos, wanted to say yes. But then I looked at my life, the peace I had built, the firm I had grown, the silence that belonged to me. I realized that while I had forgiven her, I couldn't go back. I couldn't rebuild a house on a foundation that had already crumbled. "I can't," I said. She nodded. She knew. She squeezed my hand one last time, then let go. "I know," she said. I needed you to know that I see it now. I finally see it." We sat there for a while longer, watching the leaves fall. 2 survivors of a war no one else saw. When she left, she didn't look back. She walked to her beat-up car, got in, and drove away. She was alone. She was struggling, but she was driving her own car, and she was going to her own home. She was finally free. Chapter 16. The happy ending she never expected. I remarried 5 years after I walked out of the penthouse. Her name is Sarah. She isn't an heiress. She isn't a socialite. She's a landscape architect. We met on a job site. I was the architect for the building. She was designing the gardens. I saw her arguing with a contractor who wanted to cut down a 100-year-old oak tree because it was in the way. "The tree stays," she told him, her hands on her hips. "Where the contract goes." I fell in love with her in that moment. I fell in love with her spine. Our first date wasn't at a Michelin-starred restaurant. We went to a diner that served breakfast all day. We talked for 4 hours over cold coffee. She didn't ask me who my family was. She didn't ask me about my prospects. She asked me what I was reading. She asked me why I became an architect. She saw me, not the asset, not the project, me. When I proposed, it wasn't a production. We were hiking. We were sweaty and tired and standing on top of a ridge looking out over the valley. I pulled the ring out of my pocket. It wasn't a rock that needed a security guard. It was a simple gold band. "Sarah," I said, "I want to build a life with you." She didn't cry. She laughed. She kissed me and said, "About time." Our wedding was in a park. There were 50 people. My parents sat in the front row. My father wore his own suit. My mother wore a dress she loved. They looked happy. They looked proud. There was no seating chart. There was no VIP section. There were no senators. We ate tacos. We danced to a playlist we made ourselves. It wasn't a statement. It was a celebration. Sarah doesn't check with her mother before she makes a decision. We make decisions together. Sometimes we argue. Sometimes we disagree. But we never, ever let a third vote into the room. We built a house together. I designed it. She designed the land around it. It's not a mansion. It doesn't have marble floors or a view of the skyline. But it has light. It has warmth. And it has silence, the good kind. Margaret predicted that I was temporary. She predicted that I would fade away. She was wrong. I built something permanent. I built something real. And the best revenge wasn't seeing her fall. The best revenge was realizing that I didn't need her approval to be happy. I built a life she could never buy, never manage, and never take from me. And that is the happy ending she never expected. Final chapter. What I walked away with. Margaret lost her empire. She lost her penthouse. She lost her status. But more importantly, she lost her influence. She lost the ability to make people feel small. She lost the power to define the worth of others. She became just another person with a story about who she used to be. I gained peace. I gained ownership of my life. Every dollar I earn, every decision I make, every mistake I fix, it belongs to me. And that's when I understood something important. Epilogue. The lessons this story is really about. If you've listened this far and you're wondering what to take from this, let me say this clearly. This story isn't about a wicked mother-in-law. It's not a fairy tale about a villain. It's about power disguised as love. Here's what I learned, and what I hope you remember. Lesson 1. If help comes with reminders, it isn't kindness. It's control waiting to tighten. If a gift comes with an obligation, it isn't a gift. It's a loan against your freedom. Lesson 2. When your partner allows someone else's voice to outrank yours, love doesn't disappear. It gets overridden. A marriage cannot have 3 votes. If you are constantly outvoted in your own life, you are not a partner. You are a subject. Lesson 3. Money creates comfort, but it also creates blind spots. The richer the cage, the harder it is to see the bars. Comfort can be a sedative. It can make you sleep through the dismantling of your own identity. Lesson 4. If you're shrinking to keep the peace, you're paying with your identity. Peace at the cost of your self-respect isn't peace. It's surrender. And the most important lesson, walking away isn't failure. Sometimes it's the only way to survive without losing yourself. I didn't win Margaret's approval. I didn't reclaim the past. I didn't save Lena. But I built a life no one could buy, manage, or take from me. And if this story feels familiar, if you're living comfortably but quietly disappearing, if you are shrinking to fit into a room that was built to make you feel small, remember this. A peaceful life is better than a luxurious prison. That's the lesson. Thank you for listening to my story. If this series meant something to you, please subscribe, like, and turn on post notifications for more dramas like this. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. You might just help them see the cage.